buenas tardes. Muchas gracias nuevamente a todos por acompañarnos. Antes de comenzar a introducir la mesa, quiero hacer un anuncio de que nos encontramos una cartera que estaba aquí y ya se la llevó alguien, qué miedo. Espero que haya sido María. Una cartera café. Ya, una vez hecho este anuncio, esta mesa, la segunda mesa, el tema es lenguaje e identidades. Al principio me gustaría enmarcar rápidamente la reflexión, digamos que anima a la mesa todo lo que se preparó de la mano de los directores para compartir con ustedes el día de hoy, y después voy a hablar muy brevemente de las semblanzas de nuestros invitados, relacionando un poco los proyectos al tema de la mesa de hoy. El orden va a ser muy parecido a la dinámica de la mesa pasada. Cada invitado tiene 25 minutos, 25, y posteriormente abrimos a preguntas. Comienzo con la presentación general de la mesa. La discusión central de esta mesa conjunta tres visiones diferenciadas sobre los territorios del lenguaje en relación a los principios identitarios y a la luz de experiencias concretas. Se abordarán, por tanto, tradiciones en extinción, en el sentido que el más lo va a desarrollar va a ser Fernando Palma, creencias sociales transgresoras y la apropiación de la anarquía espiritual como herencias artísticas y culturales legítimas del continente americano, en el caso de Candice Hopkins. De la mesa también se tratarán temas como la conservación del medio ambiente, el fomento a proyectos de recuperación de la escritura en pictogramas de idiomas originarios, así como algunos temas complejos que no caben bajo el marco de las tradicionales teorías de la traducción, y otras manifestaciones comunitarias que incorporan un compromiso ético con la vida. Esta última parte, digamos que tiene que ver con traducción, es el tema que va a abrir la mesa con la ponencia de Daniela Castro. Ahora muy brevemente, como les conté, voy a leer las semblanzas de cada uno de nuestros invitados y después ya vamos a dar comienzo con la ponencia de Daniela.
Gracias, Mónica.
Voy a leer todavía un poco de sus semblanzas.
Ok.
¿Sí?
Sí.
No, y después la gente comienza. Daniela Castro es de Sao Paulo, es escritora y cura en la Ciudad de Toronto. Ha recibido varias becas. Concibió y curó la exposición itinerante e intercambiante Recomendando Territorios, que fue exhibida en 7 ciudades de Brasil. Y también fue curadora de La Espiral y el Cuadrado, ejercicios sobre la traducibilidad en Bonniers Konsthall, Estocolmo. Y de hecho, parte de la ponencia tiene que ver con esa curaduría y con ese eje de investigación que abrió con esa curaduría y que ha seguido trabajando. También fue curadora de A Radically Condensed History of Post-Industrial Life, lado A, lado B, muestra en formato de LP para Impossible Show en el Espacio Madrid, así como la exposición inaugural Lights Out en el Museo de la Imagen y Sonido de Sao Paulo. Ahora les voy a presentar a Candice Hopkins, que va a tener la segunda intervención. Candice Hopkins es de Canadá, pero actualmente vive en Nuevo México. Ella es curadora y escritora. Fue residente curatorial en la National Gallery de Canadá, donde presentó la exposición Sakana International Indigenous Art. Candice también fue directora y curadora del programa de exposiciones del Western Front de Vancouver para arte experimental. En 2012 presentó una lectura para Documenta 13 y ha desarrollado ponencias en varias instituciones en América y en Europa. Sus escritos sobre arte, historia y estética indígena están publicados por el MIT Press, Walter Phillips Gallery, the National Museum of the American Indian y New York University. Actualmente es parte del equipo curatorial de Oncero Landscapes, junto con Lucía San Román, que también va a tener una intervención en el SITAC, Irene Hoffman y Janet Diz, para la exposición inaugural de la Bienal Site de Santa Fe en julio de 2014. Y finalmente Fernando Palma. Fernando Palma es de México, pero lleva unos años viviendo en Londres. Él es artista y activista. Su práctica, predominantemente escultórica, demuestra un interés por el arte precolombino y la mitología de México, así como su evidente experiencia como ingeniero industrial. Y su obra trata de abordar las enseñanzas de culturas pasadas y el impacto de la tecnología en el medio ambiente. Es miembro fundador de Calpulitecalco, una organización con sede en la Ciudad de México que busca preservar la lengua náhuatl y el medio ambiente en San Pedro Actopan, y entre sus exposiciones individuales destaca Mechatronic Circus. Y bueno, Fernando nos va a hablar además de su obra de esta iniciativa de Calpulitecalco que desarrolla en Milpalta, en la Ciudad de México. Muchas gracias y bueno, ya le cedo la palabra a Daniela. Sí.
Okay. Buenas tardes. I'm going to speak in English. I could speak Spanish, but very badly, because it's closer to Portuguese, but we decided that I speak in English, so Candice and I speak in English, and Fernando and Monica speak in Spanish, and we're all in equilibrium, and that's how we're going to go. So, as Monica mentioned briefly, I'm going to talk about translation, but as a trampoline to get into more interesting, in my view, questions. So, it's the physics of translations, as Haroldo de Campos would put it, but most of all, it's about translation as appropriation and dedication, and as such, how it may be appropriated as an ethical conduct for curatorial work, or intellectual work, or life in general. So introducing Haroldo de Campos together with his brother Augusto and Décio Pinhatari, they were the leaders of the concrete poetry movement that took place in Brazil from the 50s until, well, pretty much until today, but heavily until the 80s. And the contribution that they lent to the cultural debate in Brazil was the rediscovery of Oswald de Andrade's Anthropophagia, in a particular way that will be discussed soon, in part due to their alliance with the tropicalist movement. What they've left us, quoting Viveiro de Castro, an anthropologist, was a rigorous but open paideuma, which is a new invention of a tradition, which completely traversed nationalist totemisms, placing Brazilian art in a polyglot and multivocal aesthetic field, freed from a previous and extrinsic hierarchy. It is what Viveiros called a disjunctive synthesis, as after Deleuze, which means not having the principle of identity as cause and consequence, be it in a formal cause and the objective, but in terms of divergence and distance, or as becoming in a relational mode. So the text I'm going to read is called Que Deus te guie, pois eu não posso guiar, written 2 years ago, and there are some coincidences that are not that coincidental. I think that's why Marcio invited me here. And intended to be both an introduction to the mechanisms of Haroldo de Campos' physics of translation, and a piece contaminated by it, a product of it, as it were. A product of this physics of translation. So the title, Que Deus te guie, porque eu não posso guiar, has a footnote that I read. Is the title of a text that shall, it's kind of dark here, sorry. Oh, thanks. That shall remain untranslated. It was written in English for a Swedish publication. It is an excerpt of the book poem Galáxias that was written between 1963 and 76 by Haroldo de Campos. The poem has been translated into several languages, including English. The reason why I decided to keep in Campos' word is because I have appropriated it here to function as a title, as a place where thoughts come to inhabit, only to therein be dissolved, as Adorno would say. There is an oblique equivalent in this invitation of inhabiting the unknown for the reader who is not acquainted with Portuguese language. To how Campos begins speaking about the problems of translation, or, in Benjaminian terms, the task of the translator. Translation is Aufgabe, he says, one of the oxymoronic words in German language that conveys at the same time the idea of giving, donating, and relinquishing, abandoning. This abandonment relates to the communicational content that the translator renounces in order to re-give the form, freed from the task to simply transmit it. I imagine that for all its poetic weight, if I am to follow what Campos designated as transcreation in his radical theory of translation, to work with the physicality of the sign itself, its materiality, its sound properties, visual imagistics, I can only invite you to sense the feeling of renouncement that the verse in the title communicates. The reader should trust me that to abandon the knowledge of the place I have invited your thoughts to inhabit and be dissolved is experiencing what the verse signifies. Que Deus te guie, porque eu não posso guiar. Inhabiting and dissolving into the unknown is traveling within the force of the spiral, no beginning, no end, no set direction. Quote, ideally it begins in the always and never is its term, writes Osman Lins in The Spiral and the Square, one of the 8 narratives of Avalovara, a cult novel from 1973. But God, we are not that strong. The square, the Cartesian form with precise spatial limits, both assists and ambushes the spiral. A site of rational redemption, maybe, the original site. The spiral is the movement of translatability, its rhythmic tone, which reveals what the origin veils. The end of history, the crisis of language, the Western search for its significant other, intended pun, the schizophrenic renewal of the novelty, the immaterial connection, and the rational organization of all that makes a spin on wheels within the square. Not a spiral. Ultimately, this text sees translation as transformation, transmutation, as fictional writing, as invention that is not known by its inventor, as relinquishing the square and meeting the spiral. Then we go back to the title. I'll show you soon in the images. Que Deus te guie porque eu não posso guiar. I start with an epigraph by Mário Belachin that I translated from Portuguese, that was translated from Spanish, that reads like this. I remember going to an old and respectable homeopathic doctor. My father took me there when I was a child. I already wore an orthopedic hand in those times. The doctor touched it to measure my pulse rates. I was so intimidated that I did nothing to spare him from the equivocation. The respectable doctor grabbed the plastic wrist tightly. After all, not at any moment did he find me dead. On the contrary, as he counted the supposed pulsations, he dictated out loud to his assistants the prescription that would cure me of all maladies. That's from Flores, his book from 2009, I suppose, or the translation from 2009. Beginning with text, homeopathy is a type of medical treatment very common where I come from. It is not understood as an alternative medicine, no. In fact, it is usual to combine allopathic treatment with homeopathic drugs, should a patient desire so, or should a doctor think that it would cause less harm in the holistic, albeit technological makeup of the human body. Allopathic medicine aims objectively and mercilessly at the disease under attack. For instance, a transplantee may develop leukemia as a result of a treatment for a malfunctioning heart that had to be replaced by another's heart. But that is so because it looks at the heart only and not at the compass of the overall project that it pumps blood to. This overall project has a name, life. Then it looks at the leukemia only, keeping track of charts measuring the immune deficiency caused by the damaged equivalent, the transplant, to the original quagmire that caused it, the malfunctioning heart. And so it goes, not as a harmonic tuning, but as unwelcome interference, noise. Homeopathic interventions, on the contrary, infect the body with the very same disease that is under attack. Worsen it, strengthen the intruder that caused the malady, alias a sin against the obscene lack of illness in today's understanding of healthy living, which includes a whole program involving happiness, architecture, personal trainers, and fancy billboards. That is so because the body can, at its last resource, facing imminent death, revert the code, fracture the logic, create antibodies that in turn kill the virus, bacteria and otherwise, which has now become a Bolshevik theory of translation. He promoted the estranging aspect of the operation of translation as transformation, the transplant of a form into another form, whereby the pure language that echoes from the original is to be liberated in the translated text. Campos notes, however, that he still insists on a categorical distinction between original and translation. The original as sacred logos that is to be inhabited, sublimated even by means of exteriority. As a disobedience to the apparently natural dichotomy between form and content, the physics of translation calls for a more humane venture, which is released from the hieratic subservience of an erratic original. As such, Campos suggests that the angel of the Benjaminian redemption, as in deliverance and liberation, could be called Agesislau Santander, or in its Kabbalistic anagram, the Angelus Satanas, which offers the idea of transluciferation freed from the theological horizon of the pure language. It refuses to serve submissively to content, refuses the tyranny of a preordained logos, and ruptures with the metaphysical enclosure of presence. Translation becomes an enterprise of Satan, transgressive per excellencia. The creative translation possessed by demonism is neither pious nor memorial. It intends, at its limit, the erasure of the origin, the obliteration of the original. It aims, even if for a fraction of a second, to transform the original into the translation of its own translated version. Out of one prosthetic hand, a plastic wrist, you project my life by giving out what you believe to be the cure of all its maladies. The original reveals itself susceptible to an implacable vivisection that whirls its innards only to be brought back to light in a diverse linguistic body. Jean-Luc Nancy's I refers to a body where normally one would say categorically me, the original self, but that is assumed as often as it is shirked as being split, abandoned, deferred. I quote Nancy, "We are, along with all my more and more numerous counterparts, the beginnings of a mutation. Man himself recommences going infinitely beyond man. That is what the death of God, in all its possible senses, has always meant." The death of God gives rise to a suprahumane reproject that could be authorized only by the transgressive figure of Lucifer, light. The powerful implications of Campos' proposition, inherited from the cultural modality of Oswaldian anthropophagic reasoning, perhaps is that it does not acknowledge the original as a parameter for its exterior other. It does not acknowledge the origin period. As in the LP played backwards, transluciferation breaks through the ontological Western project by revealing that at its heart rests the selfish burden of what is to be me and the black hole that is to be the other. May God guide you, for I cannot guide. So this was a text, this was a curatorial text for a commissioned exhibition at Borneos Kosthall, an institution in Stockholm, Sweden. And I worked with my colleague Johan Waltz, and we were commissioned this exhibition, and the main theme was given to us, translation, but it was already given that through the theme we were invited to talk about Brazilian art. And then right at first I said that we would not make a Brazilian art show because, at least in my view, I don't think that's an interesting framework to frame any contemporary art production, especially when then it's already set that the paradigm is the other. So the exercise was then to use translation not to become an exercise, a rhetorical exercise of otherness. So it's important that I show you the floor plan of the institution, which is not a usual space to work with. So that's when we brought the novel, the Brazilian code novel that was published in 1973 by Os Molins, called A Valovara. If you see, we were quick to read a square in the left side of the building, and its curve in this triangle, we could see a spiral moving. So the spiral and the square, the title of the show, is one of the 8 narratives that compose this code novel, and it begins with a fictional story that Os Molins sacked, really, from a Roman sentence that was found in the Enlightenment. They found this sentence in one of the stones, carved in stone in one of the carvers. I don't know the details about that. But so he starts with the fictional, he robs that sentence to create a fictional story, and after that, this narrative begins to be the diary that he writes about the enterprise of writing that book. So there is a fold inside the book that we thought was very interesting to think of the space, to think translation. Very briefly, the story goes, Laurelius had a slave that he liked very much, and the slave was given this task that if he could find a sentence, a palindrome that could be read from left to right, right to left, up and down, he could be freed. So the slave thought for many months, and he came up with this sentence, saturare potenit opere hotas, that you can read both ways. And if you read it from left to right, it means man withholds the universe within himself. And then if you read from right to left, it means the peasant is capable of sowing the field. So this is the myth of the Rome, and ancient Rome as the original logos, because it contains both the macro and the micro in it. So the slave comes up with the sentence, but he doesn't want to give out just yet, because he wants to enjoy the fact that he knows in his body that he's free. Like he doesn't want to assure that just yet. But he goes to this brothel to celebrate, and he shares that with the prostitute, and she gets so excited that she tells everyone. When he gets back home, and Laurelius says that he's free because he already knows about the sentence, he commits suicide because he was robbed of the agency of his own being, of his freedom and way of being in the world. So this is where the novel for us, thinking about the exhibition, ends, and then we begin in the light of transvociferation to bring back to life language and being. The text that I just read, that footnote to the title, goes up. So the text is already an attempt to translate this spiraling movement, and also the LP played backwards on transvociferation, because they have to break from the footnote, which is now a head note, I don't know, going back to the title all the time. So once you break from that spell, then you get into the text. So I'm gonna, since we don't have a super long time, I'm gonna show a few examples of how we decided how we saw this project. We were very careful not to work in terms of representation, because since we decided to work in the space of the span and the square, we were free to choose works that, in our understanding, were examples of translation in their own right. Like they were not representation of means of translation, but they were operations of translation. I think there were 17 artists in the art space and another 20 in the parallel program. So I'm going to share with you a few examples that we thought in terms of singularities, because we saw them not in the cosmogonic Christian capitalist axis of artist work, place of where the artist is born. Not that. We saw them as operational translation. So what we're looking at now is Dora Longo Bahia's installation, 3-chapter installation called Wake Up Alice. I'm going to show you 2. This is a video called Finis Regis, and what she does here, she takes the Alice from the Wonderland from Lewis Carroll and Un livre plus rebelle from Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. So she's dealing with 2 women who dive into the depths of either nightmare or a dream, and she transmutates into this. This is a video, it's 22 minutes, so I brought a minute to share with you. Just to also, it comes to mind that we're dealing, of course, with a place, a building, and an institution. And the text that I just wrote, it was almost like a guide, a translating guide to be aware of not to set any hierarchy into, though it exists, of course, but knowing that it exists and understanding its mechanism, beginning from the commission until when the show opens, we were able to swear by it, and with the works and with our commitment, ethical commitment to the research. So this is the second piece that I want to share with you. In this case, Dora Longo gave an excerpt of Harold Bloom's monologue and translated into Portuguese to a New Zealand man who had never had contact with Portuguese language before, and then and the result was this.
Now mem tim fermento nem nara naraltreza dele ebafoseta argenta tres assim na mu treso pork now chanel now the hu o ignoranta he now sebo o pasua reply isso acutu ganas por now says pastor no se nega tra exportes y alcas alimas na mira frente tal desgrado se me so poder próximo a facilidade de na clã morena vagona semestre que elis sempre.
So to even the Portuguese speaker, this text renders nothing. It renders sound only. So we can think of it in terms of tuning, like the sound of translation, because it's not just it's not rubbish, it's just something else. It's not the original language translated into another badly spoken. It's just something else, music as it were. One piece that we were eager to include in the text, as we try to convince the institution that we wouldn't do a show based on national totemisms, was this installation by Walter Rydwig and Mauricio Dias, this duo. Walter is from Switzerland and Mauricio is Brazilian. And this piece was, oh, what happened? Carrying request form. And this piece, what they did, they went to an island off of the coast of Norway, and which is an island that's suffering from a process of depopulation, is disappearing from the map, really. And it's a beautiful piece. They got original footage from the 70s, and they counterparted with contemporary video of the island completely empty. Actually with only one inhabitant, and this was included as a means of us to think of distance, because when we talk about authority and producing subjectivity through difference and distance, we tend to think that this distance means like a large space in between two things, entities, but distance is actually is almost like a metaphorical space for us to think about, because distance can be within and it can be as well a geographic location. And we just thought it was very interesting to have the viewer coming into the space and seeing immediately something that's so close to them, but that because of this issue of depopulation, disappearance, that would be very far. So it was just also trying to emulate this movement of the spiral. I won't show a part of the video. Here what we see is Eugène Dittborn's piece, and it's very beautiful to think that he used to do these multi-technical paintings that he would during the dictatorship in Chile, and then he would fold it and mail it in those envelopes to other places in the world for them to be exhibited. Of course, they have super heavy political informal content, and in the description, when we send a parcel through the mail, we have to put in a description. And the way he talks about circulation and the politics of folding and unfolding as the piece travels and is mounted everywhere is just, we thought it was a poetic translation of what translation is. So we thought it was a very inspiring piece as an operation of translation. And so this is a detail of, unfortunately, we can't read a piece of it. And so I would like you to pay attention to this line with the bags of paper hanging. This is a work by Sudo Meirelles from 1976. And this, we brought this into the show because when Haroldo de Campos talks about working with the physicality of the sign and its sound and visual imagistics, it's not just a metaphorical invitation to think of translation, but it's the actual thing. So this work by Sudo Meirelles, what he does, it's very common in Brazil that people pack their lunches in these bags of paper, and they come in different sizes. So Sudo has 12 of them, and then he includes all the other sizes into either one of the bags, right? So each bag has all the other ones within, and it it comes from this original piece that he says that the difference between the sphere and the circle is the weight. So in this case, we are dealing with difference within the same, because they are the same weight, because they all contain themselves into them. They are almost the same form, they're different, but they are the same at the same time. So that's what Haroldo, or as we understand that Haroldo talks about an isomorphic reproject and bringing to our life production of difference within the same, and that is not having difference or same as a paradigm to measure against each other. I'll go. So, and this is Maga, a work by Laura Lima. She insists on calling this a live sculpture. It's not a performance. This piece tends to be playing, as it were, or being in the exhibition space for the whole, like the duration of the show and the opening hours. And basically, this was one of the strongest piece in the show, because in the sense that it was one of the most explicit in terms of arriving at the fact that translation and otherness, exercise of subjectivity, whatever we want to call it, is a blind and physical struggle, and vulnerable if you're open and to the other. It's a vulnerable exercise, and it is one that you use force, but you know, your body knows that you can't debank your adversary, because otherwise you fall too. So it is a choreography of struggle and of blindness that I think makes the rhythm of circularity that we try to imagine if we don't have a paradigm that was once imposed on us. And here, of course, I talk from a colonized background. If we try to imagine a circular space rather than pointy design, then we learn a lot from this piece. And I think, how are we doing for time, Monica? So yes, so I leave the conversation now for us to debate more later with figures of Satan and vampire and nakedness. Thank you. Do you want to speak?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you to Marcio and Paola for inviting me. I'm going to take us back in time to talk about a historical moment, but I think that one that has resonances with Daniela's presentation as well, because it's about cultural translation, but also about sickness, and sickness as it relates to the desire for wealth, the extreme desire for wealth that is a result of capitalism. So to take us back to the late 1800s, what you see here in front of you is the docking of one of two steamships. So when the Excelsior and the Discovery, two ships filled with gold that were mined from Canada's Yukon Territory, and that were also filled with now rich gold prospectors, was perhaps the single most significant event to take place in Seattle in the late 1800s. It immediately boosts the economies of the city as well as the country, And it brought the relationships between belief, in this case, what I mean by belief is the potential for economic prosperity, capital's desire and wealth to the fore. So when the Excelsior arrived in Seattle's harbor on July 15, 1897, it caused a minor media frenzy. Photos of individuals that were hauling sacks and suitcases of gold off the ship, some so full with the metal that they required more than one person to lift, circulated among news media at the time. But it was the arrival of another ship, the Discovery, 2 days later, this time which contained over 2 tons of gold, that initiated the largest collective expedition for gold in North America's history, the Klondike Gold Rush. And it held the promise of riches for anyone who was willing to undertake the journey north. And between 40 and 100,000 people abandoned their previous lives to become prospectors, suppliers, showgirls, as well as numerous other vernacular vocations in an environment that was utterly foreign to them. It had its most immediate impact in Seattle, and documents from the period report that the city emptied out almost nearly overnight, and the mayor was also caught in the craze. He was out of town during the ship's docking, and he sent in his resignation from afar to immediately join the throngs of people heading north. And I think what was different about this gold rush from previous gold rushes was that it was not only people from North America who were taking part, but it was also people from Europe. And I think part of that was because of Europe's recent adoption of the gold standard. But the Klondike contained far more personal risk than any of the other previous gold rushes. In the beginning, nearly all of the gold that was extracted out of the Yukon was done by hand. So prospectors would remove the frozen earth. They would wait until warmer weather, melt and run the earth through a system of wooden troughs of what they called slurry. And gold, being relatively heavy, would fall to the bottom. And it was only mechanized later in the rush, a development, in fact, which the Guggenheim family played a major role, and that was at its decline. So many of the potential prospectors never made it past the first leg of the ridiculously grueling Chill Creek Pass, and that's what you see behind me, and it was one of the only ways to reach the mineral-rich Yukon. And I think a detailed description of the pass is revealing. So the Northwest Coast Mounted Police were stationed at the summit of both passes that would bring you into the Yukon. And this was to ensure that each stampeder had enough goods and was adequately outfitted for 1 year. And this meant something like hundreds of pounds of flour, bacon, lard, salted pork, as well as enough long underwear and socks and jeans. And so this translated to 1 ton of goods per person, including your food, your tents, your cooking utensils. And stampeders, which is kind of a funny term, considered that they walked 80 miles for every single mile they moved their provisions. And this is the worst part of the trail. 1,500 steps that were carved out of ice. So stampeders moved up the stairs in a single line, clutching a rope and carrying their goods on their back, 50 to 60 pounds at a time. Here's another view. So the docking of the 2 ships emerged at a fortuitous moment. They docked just following a period of severe economic depression. And when I first started researching this, it was also during the time of what in the United States was characterized as the economic downturn. So the first depression, which was called the Panic of 1873, was precipitated by an overinvestment in railroads, which was a kind of economy with slow returns, as well as the switch from bimetallism to the de facto gold standard, which was brought by the introduction of the United States Coinage Act of 1873. This meant that the standard economic unit is attributed to the fixed weight of gold. So any kind of money that the U.S. had to make had to match the reserves of gold that were in the Federal Reserves. So with the introduction of the gold standard, by law, 40% gold bullion was required to back the U.S. Federal Reserve, which capped economic expansion to what was available. As well as the speed at which many other European countries adopted to the gold standards, this also further contributed to the crisis. So to give you an example, between 1873 and 1897, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, Italy, France, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Spain, Finland, and the Austrian Empire had made the switch. Britain followed Canada, or Canada followed Britain much earlier in 1853. So this immediately led to a belief in the scarcity of gold, as well as the rapid increase in its value. It was quickly hoarded under floorboards and personal safes, and it caused people to withdraw their savings from banks, causing bank runs as well as bank failures. At that time, which was then unprecedented, the United States actually had to borrow from a private bank in order to make up its gold reserves, and between 17 and 19% of the workforce were unemployed. So it's not surprising when those two ships docked, loaded with gold, that the event immediately took on near mythical proportions. Images and stories of the public spectacle that surrounded the moment were circulated in news media, providing the very boost that the economy needed. The event was read locally and abroad as a sign of the U.S.'s newfound economic prosperity. And it was arguably not really the actual goal, but the very belief in it and in economic prosperity via the widely circulated signs, the images of the two gold-filled ships, rather than any real influx of monetary resources which transformed the economy. One of the very many examples of this rapid transformation is described by Pierre Burton in his book, The Klondike, and he says that in the first 2 weeks of the gold rush, telegraph orders on the Puget Sound National Bank increased fivefold over any other period in the bank's history. The sale of bank drafts tripled and express business doubled, and by August, the city's total business had leaped by 50%. But this emphasis had other unanticipated effects, one of which is that people began seeing it everywhere. And he describes a group of Italian laborers in New York City saw gold in some sand in which they were digging and began to talk to newspapermen of fortune. A visitor to Victoria saw gold in an outcropping in a gutter near the city's post office and tried to stake a claim on the main street. Gold started to turn up in nearly every state of the Union. In Trinity County, California, they went wild over the alleged discovery of some old Spanish mines. A report from Marquette, Michigan, claimed that the town was sitting upon the top of a vein of gold that was 40 feet wide. Peru even tried to revive gold mines of the Incas, and Deadwood announced the discovery of a new gold vein as well. The old Caribou and Kootenai districts of British Columbia began to report new gold finds. Mexico claimed that there was gold in Yaqui country. Russia insisted that there were fabulous mines just across from Alaska, and even China talked about new discoveries. At the time, there was no consensus on the value of gold between the newcomers and the local indigenous people who had always lived there. Although gold was highly valued among many native societies in North America as both a resource and material, it didn't have an existing function for Tagish and Tlingit people. However, once the opportunity to trade the resource arose through the microeconomies of the gold rush, it was quickly brought into circulation among native people. Prospectors came in search of a material whose value was really only accrued at a distance once removed from the land and brought to outside markets in the United States and lesser in Canada. But prospectors weren't the only ones looking to capitalize. Indigenous populations had already been trading with Russians and Spaniards and the British for nearly 100 years, and with other indigenous people since time immemorial. And they saw the situation and took it for what it was. It was an economic opportunity. Chilkat people charged exorbitant fees for any unwitting prospector looking to cross their territory and to enter the Yukon. And those heading with their supplies over the Chilkoot and White Passes had to rely on the highly priced services often of Tagish and Tlingit men and women, who were often the only people physically capable of carrying their heavy loads. And there was a number of instances during the gold rush when the value of resources such as pack dogs, chickens, eggs, sewing machines, as as well as alcohol and entertainment, so things that had an immediate use value, far outweighed what could be tapped or traded from the ground. So gold only attained its real value outside of the local context. Unlike the beginnings of other gold rushes, early rumors as well as published reports of the wealth in the Yukon had very little impact in the South. And in fact, those reports had been taking place for over 25 years, and that made the ship's arrival that much more of a surprise. And it was in this situation, or as though the situation of extreme economic desperation had conjured its own miraculous cure. So with the events surrounding the Klondike Gold Rush, the link between desire and economic prosperity was made clear. Economic prosperity being the very motor of capitalist desire, and vice versa. I think that it also points to the degree to which magic and belief and luck remains tied to the accumulation of capital and of wealth, as well as to systems of exchange. Marcel Mauss, in the 1920s, describes the very origins of economic value as being religious in nature. In his view, they retain a ceremonial character that is both obligatory and effective. So I think no matter how distant we are from our collective origins and systems of mutual reciprocity and exchange, these activities remain, in his words, full of rites and rituals. In many ways, then, money still possesses this magical power. And it was with this understanding of magical power, ritual, and ceremony attached to the systems of exchange that four prominent Seattle businessmen drew upon when they invented what was called the Golden Potlatch. And there they are. It was a citywide festival which rather artfully combined the just-past prosperity of the Klondike Gold Rush with the mutual reciprocity at the heart of the potlatch ceremony, which is a customary ceremony among many Native North American societies and a ceremony that continues today. So during its first iteration in 1911, the Golden Potlatch took place annually for 3 years, and it was briefly resuscitated between 1935 and 1941, and it continues today in a much different form as the Seafair celebrations. So central to the festival was a performance, a rather elaborate performance of sympathetic magic, including a reenactment of the docking of the Discovery, the ship filled with gold, complete with a scale replica of the ship. So the organizers, in combining the optimism and promise of wealth of the gold rush, along with the communal gifting and redistribution of wealth that is characteristic of the potlatch, were perhaps ignorant to the fact that potlatch activities were illegal at the time in both the United States and in Canada. And their ban was quite rigorously enforced by missionaries and Indian agents as part of assimilationist policies in both countries. Here's an image during a potlatch that has taken place in Alaska to give you a sense of what the regalia looks like in a traditional event. So the potlatch ban was only repealed in Canada in 1951, and the U.S. perhaps where it was less of a threat in 1934. And during the ban, when ceremonies were not forced to a halt altogether, they continued underground. However, the ceremonies had to continue because they were the very backbone and are the very backbone of many indigenous communities. They're the way people gain their names, they're a way of avoiding war, they're a way of ensuring that the community has enough goods and food for the year. It was described by Indian agents as wasteful, unproductive, and contrary to civilized values. So it was curious then that this public reemergence in the early 1900s in this bastardized form as Golden Potlatch. Here's a scale replica of a ship. And here's one of the parades. So official invitations to the 1911 event circulated in the form of beautifully typeset postcards. A particular compelling example included an image of Siwash Indian wear sellers flanked by portraits of Chief Seattle and Princess Angeline, and the tagline promised a hot time in a cool place. And here you see a postcard with both Chinook, which is a trade language, and the translation. The 1912 edition was more elaborate. 250 plaster-scale replicas of existing totem poles were erected throughout the city, along with other public ceremonial markers. And you can see here they weren't really concerned with any kind of cultural authenticity because this is a plains cradle board, which you wouldn't find in Seattle. Major events included a large parade down the main street, as well as plays, public initiations, and the public initiations were interesting because the purpose of them was to quite literally infect the public with festival spirit. And this included as well a daily media blitz with press releases, poetry, news, songs, images, and costumes to further promote the event. So the parade then was a kind of unabashed advertising gesture to boost the city's economy, and it was also a form of social narration. Parades in some ways are a public demonstration of power through spectacle. Parades assist in solidifying connections with their audiences, and as a form of tableau, they rely on elaborate symbolism, which tells spectators a particular story about society as they pass by. So the story that was being told about the Golden Potlatch was one of organized optimism. During the parade, different ethnic groups were displayed and celebrated through dedicated floats. One was a float dedicated to Afro-Americans, another to Japanese Americans. And I thought that it was interesting that the celebration of different races and classes as part of the Golden Potlatch mirrored in many ways the permutations between assumed hierarchies and divisions between race, class, and gender that took place during the Klondike Gold Rush, as well as previous gold rushes. It was perhaps a time when cross-dressing was not only tolerated but encouraged. Think of someone like Calamity Jane, who's a famous Western figure. And the singular focus on one resource and the nearly irreducible power attributed to whoever had it in their possession brought forth intriguing instances of hierarchies being challenged or even flipped on their heads. You had relationships and business relationships between people of different classes, which would have been previously unacceptable, as well as people, I think, getting rid of certain norms. Quite quickly, women realized that they couldn't be in that environment wearing dresses, so they started wearing pants. So some of the floats in the parade celebrated technological advancements in transportation, car culture, local clubs, including the Rotary, as well as a float that was dedicated to the first cabin, which is presumably the first settler in the area. But unlike traditional potlatch ceremonies, here's one moose, just a float to moose, I think. In the festivities associated with the Golden Potlatch, there were no goods, material or otherwise, that were exchanged or even gifted. In customary potlatch ceremonies, goods in the form of material as well as non-material wealth, and I use that word kind of loosely, are generally given with the intention that they're paid back at a future date with interest. Potlatches, each with their very specific associations and intentions, depending on their local context, are one way in which indigenous societies honor past relatives, give names, repay debts, share resources, and instill social values. Peter Lamborn Wilson, who's also known as Harum Bay, on the desire of the image of the wild man in colonial America, argues that spiritual anarchy created from the willful appropriation of native traditions and beliefs is in fact America's oldest heritage. The invention of the few of the country's earliest advertising men, who you saw at the beginning, from Seattle's biggest downtown promoters, which included the Chamber of Commerce, both major newspapers, and the brand new Seattle Advertising Club, the Golden Potlatch was a self-declared advertising stunt. And the origins of the festival, as they described, are as follows. They say that they borrowed the term potlatch from the quaint jargon of the Chinook, meaning a carnival of sports, music, dancing, and feasting, and the distribution of gifts by hosts to all the guests. They developed an extended Indian fantasy to suggest the exotic and mysterious character of the potlatch. The Tillicums of the Ilteus, and this is them pictured here in the boat, as well as the admin, formed a local secret order, and the narrative that shaped the Potlatch Festival was that the highest Tai, who was the chief of the North, paddled to Seattle to visit his white brethren of the South. He was attended by leaders of 5 Alaskan tribes, each represented by a contrived totem. The highest Tyee shared his knowledge of the picturesque and romantic Indian North with potlatch visitors, and in return, the city of Seattle offered him access to the ways of modernity. I think it's important to point out that the specific ceremony that the Golden Potlatch was conjuring remains integral to Tlingit society both in the Yukon and in Alaska. And the ceremony is called a ku'eks. It's a memorial ceremony, most closely resembling contemporary understandings of the potlatch. And it has spiritual and healing dimensions for Tlingit people. It's undertaken to commemorate the recently deceased. And during the ceremony, as it's performed now, the hall is stacked with food and other material goods, things like berries and apples and oranges, as well as pop and blankets and other special gifts that are to be given to specific individuals. The most sacred of objects are not displayed publicly, as they would be in Western culture, on walls or in showcases. Instead, the most highly valued objects, which are called atau, are kept in chests and are out of sight. Money is given at these events, but it has taken on a symbolic dimension. It's given quietly as an act of generosity, not of competition, to friends and relatives. The host begins the ceremony with what's called the widow's cry. It's a song performed by the opposite moiety or the guests, and its purpose is to respond to remove the grief of the host. And it's central to this idea of balance and reciprocity that it remains central to Tlingit society. So through an act of sympathetic magic, which is an act of mimicry performed in order to bring the thing being copied into being, social and economic value systems from both Native and European societies were merged to create this new hybrid event. It was produced in the hopes, I think, that the surprise arrival of the Excelsior and the discovery of the 2 ships would reconjure a moment of economic optimism. And it created a kind of exaggerated link between capitalist desire and wealth through a narrative about sickness. And this was an attempt to willfully expedite this process. So in a moment of genius marketing, the men behind the Golden Potlatch created a perfect mascot for their event. It was called the Potlatch Bug. It emerged in 1912 during the second iteration of the festival, and it was the event's public face and highly recognizable brand. So it was represented in a style that's, I guess, in some ways typical or stereotypical of Northwest Coast art, with black form lines and red and white. And the bug was more human than insect-like. And its primary characteristic, and this is according to the advertisers, was its infectious grin. So through the marketing campaign, the organizers pointed to an intriguing link between the desire for economic prosperity and illness, and I think that's something that still characterizes capitalist societies now. So the purpose of their mascot was to inoculate you with carnival spirit. They even created what they called a bug high priest, a figure which merged faith with their understandings of the potlatch. Their hypothetical virus that was to infect Seattle's populace had a name as well. It was called enthusiasmitis. So the initiation into the Golden Potlatch Club included a mock injection of the sacred virus. And I can imagine that was done with a combination of both religious zeal and the focus of ritual, and the injection was administered by an Ag Club member who attended the meeting in full regalia. And Pierre Burton similarly describes the effects of the Klondike Gold Rush as a kind of sickness as well. In his words, so infectious was the Klondike epidemic that even the flimsiest rumor served to send hundreds dashing to the farthest corners of the northern hemisphere. The Golden Potlatch, with his performative rhetoric of sickness associated with capitalist desire, enacts both the symptoms of colonialism while at the same time constituting, I think, a public acknowledgement of its existence, of colonialism's existence. In this instance, perhaps revealing a need, if deeply buried in these colonial actors pictured behind me, for the true spirit and intent of the ku'eks, that is, to be healed. So So the mimesis that was brought forward by the golden potlatch, hang on, I'm going to go back for a minute. I think that productively, Michael Tausig's, the anthropologist, the idea of his term mimetic excess is in many ways what's at play here. And a particularly compelling image from the event shows the four progenitors of the festival dressed in stunning woven Tlingit raven's tail robes with traditional headdresses. And here they're taking on the identity of a myth of their own devising. They're quite literally becoming the fictitious Alaskan chiefs who paddled down from the north in search of modernity. So the mimesis brought forward by the golden potlatch was decidedly imperfect. From the outset, its intention, I think, was not to create a perfect copy, but to instead borrow from the idea of the potlatch for different means. From this perspective, the festival was a public performance of a larger narrative about economic prosperity, always already from a settler's perspective. It was a form of mimetic excess framed by individual desire for wealth and power, made possible by the willful conjuring of modern-day capitalism. Perhaps to fully enter modernity, it was necessary for Seattle to perform this mimesis, to experience the freedom to live reality as really made up. It was this moment of creative freedom and quite liberal bastardization of other economic values offered by very generalized understandings of the potlatch that this event achieved some of Marcel Mauss's ambitions for hybridized economies that he first proposed in his book called The Gift. And in his word, these concepts of law and economies that it pleases us to contrast, liberty and obligation, liberality, generosity, and luxury, as against savings, interest, and utility, it would be good to put them in a melting pot once more. He argues for the re-recognition of the value of reciprocity and exchange, something that for him forms the very basis of social life, and by extension, social values. Thank you.
Today I'm full of excuses. I could probably speak about my home country, my town, better in English than in language. So I'm asking you to forgive me for that. I'm learning language. For this reason, I'm gonna ask if it is possible to truly bring our ancient gods to this land, because I feel kind of sentimental about where I come from and the way now Mexico City is growing so fast. Que me perdone Dios. Totlalhuan. Totlalhuan es una palabra en náhuatl que quiere decir nuestra tierra. De lo que yo les vengo a conversar es un poco del trabajo que realizo para Calpulitecalco, una organización en San Pedro Tocpan que nace de la necesidad y de la tristeza, creo, de ver cómo el sureste del Distrito Federal se está ahora transformando en lo que es el resto de la ciudad, especialmente en el caso de los problemas económicos, violencia y el descuido de la tierra. Esta parte es, creo, muy importante porque para nosotros los mexicanos, especialmente los que vivimos en el Distrito Federal, estamos muy desenterados de la realidad de Milpa Alta. Y para mí, en lo personal, porque Milpa Alta es una confederación muy vieja de 12 pueblos que a lo largo de 500 años se ha mantenido firme en el principio de mantener tierra, de cuidarla, y creo que en las últimas 2 décadas prácticamente, o en las últimas 3 décadas, todo se ha perdido. Entonces, más que una lectura de un ensayo, es una súplica, porque quiero invitar a la gente que participa aquí y a la gente que viene invitada de otros lugares a reflexionar en este sentido. En este caso también quiero excusarme porque en mi intento de aprender náhuatl, en mi intento de promoverlo en mi región, quisiera yo invitar especialmente a mi pueblo a que lo aprenda, porque en la lengua náhuatl yo he encontrado la verdadera raíz que por mucho tiempo me ha guiado y me ha salvado de muchos problemas. Tal vez no se entienda mucho de esta forma. Yo quiero por eso explicar un poco este pictograma. Es un pictograma que yo he fabricado, por decirlo así, de mis estudios de lengua náhuatl. Para esto quiero decir que la lengua náhuatl es una lengua que se caracteriza por ser aglutinante, es parecida en su estructura a lo que sería el alemán, donde se reúnen, se van trozando pedacitos de una palabra para conformar una idea. La acción de las manos en ese sentido es muy importante porque pasa a veces desapercibida, pero regresándome un poco, es una oración, el gesto que yo llevé a cabo. Es una oración que dice: Tlazokamati inipal nemuwanin, sentetl tonali sentetl utzinkapa, Tlazokamati sentetl tlakuali sentetl atzin, Tlazokamati Mismalakachoa, Tlazokamati. Y que quiero decir gracias por quien existo, gracias por el día en que vivo, por la mañana y por el sol, gracias a los alimentos y gracias al agua que bebo aquí. Y ese es el sentido en que esta forma, este tipo de ideogramas, pictogramas, se construyen. Entonces, Totlalhuan quiere decir nuestra tierra. Para esto quiero también aclarar que los pictogramas en los códices que muchos de nosotros conocemos, como el Mendoza, el Xolotl, entre otros, parecen como caricaturas, y sabemos por supuesto que son una palabra, pero no necesariamente, desde luego, la entendemos. Entonces, también es una peculiaridad de este tipo de escritura que solo fue elaborado para enunciar nombres propios, nombres de los dioses, de personas y de fechas calendáricas. Es una lengua que por su habilidad de ser aglutinante también tiene la característica de adaptarse al tiempo, de tal manera que conceptos o ideas como lo que es un automóvil o un aeroplano se pueden expresar en náhuatl muy fácilmente. Pero está dedicado esencialmente, como decía, a los nombres, a las fechas y a los toponimios, nombres del lugar. No así a los sustantivos, a los adjetivos, aunque de cualquier forma, en otros ejemplos como existen en el códice Charlotte, son verdaderas lecturas de eventos temporales. Pero para hacerlo esto más claro, quiero concentrarme en por este momento. Perdón. Es que quiero la flecha. No va a salir. ¿Cómo regreso? Bien. Regresar.
Se trabó.
Pasó. ¿Vamos a regresar a la siguiente? Sí. Y significa el lugar rodeado de cerros, en forma de altares. Se pueden ver en esto algunas características de la región. Una de las situaciones más importantes, y que es la preocupación de Calco, es el impulsar el náhuatl. La lengua en el lugar se habló hasta 1957, de acuerdo a los trabajos de Rudolf Svantig, hasta en un 90% de la población. Pero a la fecha solo se habla en un 3.9% de la población. Es una situación, creo, alarmante porque algo que hace referencia al trabajo de Daniela en el sentido de las traducciones, en el que se hablaba del mundo actual en posesión de Satán, una cosa así. De alguna manera es una idea que también se refleja en la pérdida del náhuatl. En tiempos pasados, en los cuentos de Doña Luz Jiménez, se habló de esa transformación y se decía que las cosas se habían echado a perder y se anunciaban en náhuatl como Castilancuepa, que quiere decir convertirse en castellano, o en cristiano, que quiere decir cristiano. La historia de Momosco es, creo, ilustrativa de muchas de las cosas que pasan en la República. La República de Momosco, por decirlo así, o la Confederación de 12 Pueblos, se sabe que fue construida en alrededor de 1560, pero esto data de un documento apócrifo. Hay es un documento muy contendido en ámbitos intelectuales, pero es algo que refleja mucho de la sociedad actual y que data de esta construcción de 12 pueblos en la que se relatan la historia de su fundación desde 1460 aproximadamente, cuando una familia de Tenochtitlan toma posesión del lugar donde ya habían asentados otros grupos de origen chichimeca. La población por eso en la actualidad se reconoce como chichimeca azteca. Cada uno de los pueblos fue, en este caso, fundado por una familia chichimeca. En el caso de San Pedro Tocpan, de donde yo vengo, fue la familia Tepejopitzin. La familia esta familia se le dejó al cargo del lugar para cuidarlo, para sembrarlo y protegerlo. En la actualidad el lugar está prácticamente abandonado. Es un sistema de terrazas donde en tiempos pasados se cultivaron cosas como algodón, y en algunos documentos se dice que inclusive alguna variedad de algodón azul. Este simplemente es un trozo de este documento que creo es bien interesante porque ha servido de ancla para la población, y hasta la fecha se usa en debates en relación a la posesión de la tierra. En Milpalta existen tres tipos de propiedad: la privada, la ejidal y la comunal. Y esto data precisamente de este documento. Es tan importante porque ha hecho que la misma confederación se haya mantenido unida y de alguna forma haya conservado sus tradiciones y costumbres, y por eso al mismo tiempo la región. En el náhuatl quiero comentar que no existe la palabra basura, y en mi edad he visto que al desaparecer el náhuatl, los lugares se llenaron de basura. En mi trabajo como artista construyo máquinas en electrónica, pero tal vez sin notarlo estaba haciendo alusión a ciertas cosas de las que les estoy hablando. Otra vez. Es que como no tiene... Ya. No, otra vez. No, es que no hay un señalador. No tiene un señalador. Creo ha existido en otras regiones del mundo y que es muy difícil de establecer. El problema, sobre todo, es que las generaciones nuevas, desde luego, no tienen una importancia, no ven una importancia en relación al náhuatl, es decir, un usufructo, ¿no? Pero la intención de nosotros es por eso buscar alternativas, y creo que esta en lo particular puede ser una, ¿no? Donde estamos trabajando colectando la mayor posible cantidad de lugares en sus nombres originales, traducirlos a este formato y con ello impulsarla mediante su elaboración de manera electrónica tal vez, y establecerlos en los diferentes lugares de la región. Este trabajo que ven aquí es producto de esta investigación. Aquí por eso verán varios dibujos, los cuales en realidad conforman el paisaje del lugar. Para quien no conoce esto, obviamente esto es sencillamente como un mero símbolo. Una de las peculiaridades, como yo había notado anteriormente, es la de que el náhuatl tiene una fuerte manera de ilustrar, de captar el lugar. Entonces, de esta forma ha sido posible reconstruir el mapa no solamente contemporáneo, sino cotejarlo en su aspecto histórico. Algunos de los aspectos que la lengua capta, por eso son de tipo geográfico, de tipo idiosincrático y también de tipo biótico. Eso nos ha facilitado la posibilidad de ver el cambio que el crecimiento urbano ha tenido sobre el lugar. Uno de los topónimos más interesantes que creo se he elaborado es el de, perdón porque no tengo manera de señalar aquí, es el que está a la derecha en la esquina superior. Es el cerro Teutli. Es un cerro que por su posición y por su forma es un volcán en realidad, y se ha considerado como el protector de la región. Desde cada uno de los 12 pueblos se puede ver muy claramente este volcán, y todos los en noviembre se realiza una ceremonia donde acuden muchas personas, especialmente de origen indígena, a hacer una alunación. Y es interesante porque está precisamente al margen de lo que es San Pedro Tocpan en relación a San Gregorio Atlapulco. El pueblo, en ese sentido, creo, ha abandonado este uso donde habitualmente se realizaba una ceremonia, se acudía con comida para suplicar por las lluvias, por el bienestar del lugar, y con eso se procuraba la fertilidad de los campos. Pero si se pueden apreciar, son dos cerros juntos. El cerro más grande tiene un tetli, que es lo que le da el nombre al cerro, que quiere decir gran jefe. El cerro más pequeño está trozado. El nombre original es Xaltepetl, y que quiere decir cerro de arena. Está trozado porque en la actualidad está siendo explotado como los cerros de Santa Catarina, a un lado de Chalco. Y de esta manera los otros símbolos van conformando de esa manera un mapa que creo es no solamente que creo es temporal en ese sentido. Parte de esta investigación, como decía, ha sido el intentar recuperar no solamente la lengua, sino sobre todo la parte visual. En ese sentido, quisiera yo abordar de manera directa a las generaciones más jóvenes, porque claro está, son generaciones que están más influidas por la imagen. De cualquier forma, estos son 5 neopictogramas donde están expresados varias de las acometidas de Calpuletecalco, la actividad cultural, que en náhuatl se traduciría como Toltecayo, que es el primero arriba y que está compuesto de 3 sílabas. El sonido tol, que es los tules que llevan en la cabeza la imagen, la otra que es el tlacatl, y el pie, que es el sonido ochtli, y que conjunto conforman un sustantivo abstracto, como podría ser hermosura o cualquier otro sustantivo, pero de manera abstracta. El siguiente es el de residencia artística. Claro está, en la antigüedad no existía un concepto semejante, pero con este he querido entonces dar esa idea. Abajo está una casa que en náhuatl se lee como Cali, enseguida están unas vírgulas rojo y negro, que eran los colores de la sabiduría, y luego la mano que está utilizando una poa de maguey, que en conjunto forman la palabra tlacuelo, y la olla encima es la terminación co, que normalmente se utiliza para enunciar lugares. Este es otro intento de expandir mi interés en la lengua, donde ya voy creando otras formas de escribirlo, que son verdaderas oraciones. No es nada nuevo. el Código Social existen expresiones semejantes. La bandera de verde, por ejemplo, está diciendo Tlaloc, Quichihuas, Totlalhuan, Toctlán, y que quiere decir nuestro Dios de la lluvia, Tlaloc, crea nuestra tierra al lado de las cañas. De la misma manera, las otras banderas están construidas. Desafortunadamente, por mis accidentes, quedan solamente 5 minutos. Pero aquí ilustro en la forma en que estas banderas están anotando sentimientos semejantes en relación al pueblo. La intención es después instalarlas en la área, porque en un ejemplo más claro, que es este mural, en el que solamente ilustro la parte preparativa, he visto una reacción muy positiva de parte de la población. En ella se encuentran anotados, así si viajáramos de donde está la parte de la cola de la víbora, más o menos haciendo un círculo, vemos un cerro grande y que se lee como Huitotech, enseguida es el Sempoltepetlacincla, enseguida es Atlapulco, ahí se puede ver uno que es muy claro, que creo todos conocemos, el de Xochimilco, enseguida el Teutli y el Cerro Xaltepetl, entre otros. Se pueden anotar también ahí los barrios de Toctlán, que significa al lado de las cañas, el barrio de Ocotitla, al lado de los ocotes, el de Panchimalco, que es el lugar donde se guardaban las banderas y los escudos, y el último, que es el de Musla, lugar de las tunas, o al lado de donde hay muchas tunas. Encima de este cuadrante en verde está de manera muy esquemática la idea de la Ciudad de México, y la carretera que baja al lado contrario, del lado derecho, es la carretera México-Huastepec. La disyuntiva que debo presentar con esto es la opción que vive Milpalta, el endosar los valores que la lengua ha de alguna forma conservado, y de otra los valores que desde luego la ciudad promete. Aquí quiero sencillamente mostrar dos niños de lugar en los que sus padres han querido darles ese sentimiento, ¿no? Tlacael y Mayahuel. Esta en realidad es la verdadera pérdida para todos nosotros como ciudadanos mexicanos, especialmente en el distrito, porque el pueblo está construido sobre una serranía lábica que es la máxima el captador de agua en el Distrito Federal, de 40 a 60% del agua que el Distrito Federal consume viene de ahí, y sobre esta serranía están todos estos tepamil, que son construcciones muy antiguas y que en la actualidad se están poblando, como ya sabemos, en el norte ha ocurrido. La diferencia está en que en realidad sí es la última reserva ecológica del Distrito Federal, y que fue declarada de esa forma desde el 87. Es avasallante la manera en que está creciendo, y bueno, quiero concluir sencillamente con la invitación a quien visite Milpalta, tenga un poco esto, ¿no?, en mente, ya que es el último de los lugares en que podemos conservar nuestra Ciudad de México. Y al final les quiero mostrar un proyecto que estoy llevando a cabo con el Museo del Chopo, en el que vamos a construir de manera iconográfica un Quetzalcóatl, pero en realidad es una estación meteorológica. El trabajo electrónico que he llevado a la fecha me ha llevado a la conclusión que la electrónica en sí es como el bastón del ciego de nuestros días. Tal es así que dependemos ahora de los sensores de velocidad del viento, nivel de lluvias, dirección del viento, temperatura, presión, etc. Y se han perdido desde luego los valores autóctonos con que la gente de diario podía leer la dirección del viento, etcétera, los cambios, y se sabía específicamente cuándo era la fecha de sembrar y así. ¿Podríamos poner ahora la música?
Está aquí.
Sí, está. Ahí está aquí. Sí.
Sí, bueno, la idea era dejar la música que nos compartió Fernando Palma para el tiempo de las preguntas. Les quiero agradecer la reflexión a los tres sobre la relación entre el lenguaje y las identidades a la luz de los ejercicios de transcreación y transvociferación en el caso de Daniela, de la simbolización y el potlatch en la ponencia de Candice, y de la defensa y la preservación de la lengua náhuatl del proyecto que nos presentó Fernando. Ahora le vamos a abrir las preguntas y posteriormente pues seguimos la discusión ya en la comida. Nosotros habíamos preparado algunas preguntas que iban, digamos, en relación a enmarcar el lenguaje y la identidad con la relación de la comunidad y el estar los unos con los otros, pero bueno, por tiempo creo que mejor lo abrimos y ya después continuamos. Gracias.